In this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board Podcast, Leif, Thulin, and I, we are going to talk about the top NBA prospects in the South. Stay tuned to find out which prospects Leif Thulin is going to be monitoring or watching closely and can possibly help their draft stock with a strong performance in the NCAA Tournament. Big shout out to each and every person that has made the Locked On NBA Big Board Podcast your first listen of the day. And in this case, it could be your third listen of the day because this is the third podcast that we're dropping as we are covering the top NBA prospects by region. And like I said in the open, this is all about the guys in the South. And this episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. And if you are not subscribed to the NBA Big Boy YouTube channel, please subscribe, like, share, comment, and click the bell so you can be notified every time we drop an episode because we are coming at you every day. And also, if you love the NBA, your favorite Locked On NBA team has a podcast. I'm sorry, not a podcast, a newsletter. Check it out at lockedondaily.com. It is the one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox every day. All right, Leif, the man that watches more college basketball than anyone else. It is your time. It is your season. This is what you wait for every year. And you are here to talk about some of the top prospects in the South. So if you had to look at the list of teams that are playing in the South region, and there's some good matchups. Like I just realized today, I still haven't even done my bracket yet. I just realized that Michigan and Michigan State are in the same region. Who is your top prospect in this region?
I'd go with Jase Richardson from Michigan State. I don't think at the beginning of the year he necessarily got the same acclaim as some of the other freshmen because he was coming off the bench, but he was steadily putting up numbers and drew some analytic darling. He's scoring baskets, and then he mixed the analytics people saying, wow, he's like really efficient with the ethical hooper people saying, wow, he takes mid-range jump shots. He takes shots off the bounce. But honestly, he's just a really good basketball player. And since Michigan State has embraced that he is their best basketball player, they've won at a very high level to the point where many people have them in their Final Four. So Jase Richardson's my top prospect. I think he's a borderline lottery pick. And he's smaller. And he's a two guard, so maybe that scares some people off. But sometimes you just got to look at the basketball player, and he's an effective scorer who's been efficient at every level, both intermediate, at the rim, shooting threes, off the bounce, catch and shoot, and he competes. And I think something that goes overstated is he understands the game really well, and I think that's because he had a professional father, Jason Richardson, and it makes sense in the way he processes the game. And I think he's more versatile than people may give him credit for.
Yeah, he's definitely emerged as not only their best prospect, but a potential lottery pick. I didn't have him on my list coming into the season as guys that were going to be one and dones. If you were to ask me which Michigan State prospect that I thought was due for a breakout year, I probably would have told you Xavier Booker. And I was really high on Booker coming into college. But yeah, Michigan State is they're a team that I have seen some people talking about as a potential Final Four team or championship team. It would be interesting because Jase's father, Jason, was on the 2000 Michigan State team that won the national championship. And here we are 25 years later, and his son is the best prospect on the team. And what's even more interesting is that Michigan team that his dad was on, he played a small role off the bench, then came back as a sophomore and ended up being a top 5 pick. So a lot of different storylines in that, especially if Michigan State reaches the Final Four. Is he your 2024 version of Reed Sheppard in a sense, as far as a guy that you don't know if he's a 1, if he's a 2, he's not going to wow you with, elite athleticism, but you just can't deny the efficiency. And despite the fact that you can't necessarily slot him into a position, maybe Reed people thought was a point guard, but you know that he can play on or off the ball, but it's just the efficiency. Do you think he could end up having or do you think he is this year's version of Reed Sheppard?
There's certainly some parallels, especially the both know what they're doing. They had parents that played professionally, and they play on a team that has enough talent around them to where they're not needed to score a crazy amount of points. But when they're playing their best, they're the best player on the team. I think there are parallels. I'd be surprised if he has the surge that Reed had, but as you guys know, who are loyal listeners to Big Board, I wasn't terribly high on Reed Shepherd last year. So I think Jase will be more appropriately rated, kind of 10 through 12, as opposed to Reed soaring up to 3 and on some people's boards 1. But I mean, the crazy thing about Jase Richardson, though, and I'll bring up another guy that, he might play in the second round, is Kam Jones. They're very similar basketball players. The thing is, they're similar, and Jase Richardson is a freshman and Kam Jones is a senior. They're both left-handed, silky smooth, can get wherever they want on the court and score. The thing is, I think Jase Richardson, though we're not saying he's a wowing athlete, unlike his dad who could soar, I think he's the better and more quick, twitchy athlete between he and Kam Jones. And Kam Jones, I think, should have been a first-team All-American. But Kam Jones is a senior who's navigating and holds a enormous workload on his shoulders. He's like Atlas carrying the weight of the world for Marquette. And he gets to the rim. He has this unconventional scoop shot. Once he goes left, forget about it. He's going to score. And he's a good shooter. He's just tasked with taking too many difficult shots. So his percentages look pretty mundane. But I'm pretty high on Kam Jones still.
What's interesting about that, the parallel between those two was we knew that Kam Jones could score. He was Marquette's leading scorer last year, and that Marquette team had 2 guys that were drafted. The concern was, can he play point? And not only does he show this year that he can play point guard, he averaged like 5 or 6 assists per game. How that relates to Richardson is that's one of the questions is, can he play point? And if you look at the numbers, he's averaging less than 2 assists per game, but maybe it's just opportunity. Kam Jones did not have the opportunity to play point guard the last few years because he played with Tyler Kolek, who led the NCAA in assists. Gets an opportunity this year, leads Marquette to the 8th seed?
7 seed.
7 seed, I'm sorry, 7 seed. And he's a first round pick. And I did a Locked On Mavs podcast yesterday, and they were asking me about which prospect do I think could come in and help Dallas right away. And I said, yeah, if you think about it, unless the Mavs get Dylan Harper or Cooper Flagg, I don't know who's going to be able to come in and help them right away. I don't know if there's a 19-year-old that is ready to contribute, especially if their timeline, like Nico Harrison said, is they're trying to win within the next 2 years. And so the prospect that I thought kind of made sense that could help them out is a guy that they can maybe trade back for, would be someone like Kam Jones, because I think he's plug and play and NBA ready to contribute. While I think some of the younger guys like a Jeremiah Fears or Nolan Traore, some of those guys would probably be best suited going to a team like the Nets, where they can just play through a bunch of mistakes. But that matchup, let's talk about that matchup. 7-10, I think, is one of the more intriguing matchups of the first round. You got Kam Jones against Donovan Dent. I'm a huge Donovan Dent fan. I think Donovan Dent, in my opinion, is the second best playmaker in this draft class. I have him behind Yegor. I think he's the better player than Yegor today. If I needed to pick one guy to win a game, I'm definitely going with Donovan Dent. But I want to hear your thoughts on this matchup.
Yeah, I'm very excited. The unfortunate thing is when you say Dent versus Jones, neither will guard each other, which is a shame because the old school matchup would indicate it. Stevie Mitchell's an excellent on-ball defender for Marquette, and he'll be tasked with guarding Donovan Dent. But I think this is an upset alert because Marquette early in the year was a top 7 team and not a 7 seed, a top 7 team. And this team has just fallen in hard times because they don't have enough outside of Kam Jones' brilliance. And he makes the right reads, he makes the right passes, but his efficiency has dropped as the workload has increased and the intensity and the scouting reports have become more knowledgeable. So Marquette needs others to score. Donovan Dent is the best player. He's the guy who stirs the drink for New Mexico, but they have a couple other guys capable of knocking down shots and scoring the basketball. So I think this is a decent upset spot. Donovan Dent's one of my favorite watches. He's got great pace with the ball. He gets to the rim and creates for others. Like you said, one of the leading assist guys in the nation. And I'd be very curious to see how much Donovan Dent is shown to people. Is it just going to be Stevie Mitchell the whole time, or are they going to show 2 and make someone else beat them? And then I'll ask the same question for Kam Jones. So that's one of the first round matchups I'm most excited for as a college basketball fan, but also as a draft evaluator. I think it's a fun matchup just because you see two players that play the same role for a heliocentric team, that the ball's going to be in their hands and they make it happen. Who can do it better and who's going to get slightly more help? So I'm very excited for that matchup.
I actually like Nelly Jr. Joseph for New Mexico. He's one of my sleeper guys, older prospect, but I see him as someone that I think could shock some people and carve out some NBA minutes. Going to be a long route. I mean, he can possibly have like a Trey Jemison type route to the NBA, to where he probably goes to the G League elite camp, or maybe even Portsmouth, works his way up, goes to the G League team. A team in the NBA has some issues with injuries, and they just need a active big that can come in and rebound, run the floor. And I think there's a role for him in the NBA. I think he can fill that role for a team. Basketball season is heating up, and there is no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks, which is the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, all you have to do is just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections for shots you win up to 1,000 times your cash. It is easy to use. It is available in over 30 states, and it lets you mix and match projections across different sports. And Prize Picks makes it simple. You can set your lineup in less than 60 seconds, and you can stay engaged all game long. And when you win, your money hits your account in as little as 15 minutes. So there is no waiting around. And every Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25%, giving even more value to your lineup. So download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNBA for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. When it comes to grocery shopping and meal planning, I've had this ongoing problem. I just really don't have the time. Between work, life, and trying to eat healthier, I am constantly feeling stressed out. I'd go to the grocery store, buy things that I don't need, and then end up with no time to actually cook. And sticking to my health goals, an absolute struggle. But everything changed when I discovered Hungry Root. Honestly, it is a game changer. It is the easiest way to eat healthy without all of the stress. And with Hungry Root, it's like you have your own personal shopper and nutritionist all in one. They take care of your grocery shopping. They recommend meals that fit your taste and your health goals, from everything from anti-inflammatory to high protein and gluten-free options. And the best part is that every meal is ready in 15 minutes or less. I'm talking quick, healthy meals that actually taste good, all delivered straight to your door. It is a huge time saver and can make eating healthy so much simpler. You're going to absolutely love Hungry Root. For a limited time, you get 40% off your first box and a free item in every box for life. Just go to hungryroot.com/lockedonnba. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's hungryroot.com/lockedonnba, LOCKEDONNBA, to get $40 off your first box and a free item of your choice for life. Again, hungryroot.com/lockedonnba. Do not miss out. All right, let's switch to Auburn. Auburn is the number 1 overall seed in this tournament. They don't have a lot of momentum coming in. They've lost 3 out of their last 4 games. They did not win the SEC tournament, but they are battle tested. I mean, they had the toughest schedule that I've ever seen. I want to say like they've played all of the number 1 seeds this year. They played Duke. They played Houston, and that was a game that Tahaad Pettiford got loose. They obviously played Florida because they're in the same conference. They played Alabama, who's a number 2 seed, and they played Tennessee, who is a number 2 seed. So the only number 2 seed that they didn't play is St. John's and Michigan State. And half of the top 20 teams have been on their schedule. So like I said, they're battle tested. They have to be hungry because they lost last year in the first round. We'll talk about the guy that was responsible for that upset later on in this episode. So I saw a listener post an interesting stat, and I haven't had the time to verify it, but James and I did a podcast on the top prospects in the West region, and I casually mentioned that outside of Duke, and maybe Florida, the other number one seeds don't have a first round pick. And so this stat that someone brought up to me was that there's never been a team that won the championship that did not have a first round pick. So my question for you is Johni Broome a first round pick? And what type of tournament will he need if you don't have him as a first round pick to jump in that first round?
Well, I personally am a little lower on Johni Broome's NBA upside because I think he takes a very specific role to thrive in the NBA. And I think he very well could be with a good tournament, though. I think it's hard to ignore the productivity. It's hard to ignore what he does well. He rebounds very well. He's got great hands, and he appears to have long arms, and he corrals everything. Defensively, I don't think he's the best at moving his feet necessarily, but he's got very good instincts defensively. And offensively, my concern stems from him, not from what the role will be offensively, but it's just offensively when he scores, it's like he goes to the low block and he uses counter moves or he overpowers you. If you can't overpower, he's hitting fadeaways. And then when he goes up to the rim, he doesn't really have much juice lifting up to score over people. And in the NBA, you're not going to put him on the block. So I say all that to say this. He's going to be a pick and roll lob threat probably, but I don't think he's got the vertical bounce to be a lob threat or be a true rim protector in the NBA as much as he is in college. I think that's where the difference is. And the defensive ideals that Auburn plays with are only able to be executed because they have another big playing next to him in Dylan Cardwell, who I think is the better defensive big. So Johni Broome is very good. He's very talented, but I just think that expecting same levels of productivity on the defensive end to translate to the NBA that's a risky proposition in my opinion. So I think he's probably a second round pick. If like for instance, and I've said this before, I think Alex Condon's significantly better as a prospect than Johni Broome. And I really like Florida. I talked about Thomas Houck the other day, but I think if you watch them play that matchup in which Florida got the better of Auburn, Condon was able to guard Broome one-on-one, and it threw everything off for Auburn. And Auburn wasn't able to take advantage because Broome wasn't able to take advantage. And I think you saw a lack of burst in that game that has become more apparent and when Auburn has lost games.
What do you think about Tahaad Pettiford?
I like Tahaad Pettiford. He's a talented player. It's an interesting one. I actually wonder if he'll come back to school. I wonder if he's the type of guy who could have a really good performance and they win the championship and that changes the evaluation altogether. And he goes because like no time better than the present. But it feels like he could be that guy for a team. And Bruce Pearl loves him, plays him heavily as a freshman on a national championship contender. So I would go back if I was Tahaad Pettiford with NIL. But his game's very fun. He scores, and he's pretty efficient. He's a lefty. He gets in the paint. He can shoot floaters. He can get to the rim, step back threes, live ball, dribble, passing. I think he needs to become a better passer, but he's got the things that make it possible for someone of that diminutive nature.
Yeah, what he lacks in ideal physical attributes, he makes up for it in heart. I mean, he showed that in the Houston game early in the season. I mean, we're talking about a guy that's a freshman going into Houston. And Houston it's Houston. They got some dogs on defense, was not afraid of the moment, came out and led Auburn to victory. So I think a strong NCAA tournament could help boost his draft stock. And he's just been so underrated all season as a guy that has performed well in the SEC. No, he doesn't have the keys to the offense, but he has shined in some of the bigger moments. All right, let's go back to Michigan. Danny Wolf. Danny Wolf is a very unique prospect. We're talking 7 foot, 250, can pass, moves extremely well for a man that size. He is considered a first round pick. What would you like to see from Danny Wolf to bump him into maybe a guy that goes in the 20s or the teens to possibly the back end of the lottery? Or is it even possible in your opinion?
I mean, he's older is the first thing to consider. And I don't actually subscribe to too much of that age being a thing that knocks people out of contention for lottery. But I just want to indicate that to everyone. My biggest thing about Danny Wolf is he's very turnover prone.
Yeah.
He's loose with the ball and he tries to slot in passes. And sometimes I think, the fact he can make them and he sees it is a good thing. But I just think he's a little too loose with the ball. And you'd really have to have a lot of faith to say that's the role we envision for him in the NBA. So my question would be, if you're drafting him that high, or even in the top 20, if not the lottery, why what is the role you envision for your NBA team for Danny Wolf? Because he's going to be at Michigan, the point forward. I don't see many NBA teams turning the keys over to a guy who's 23 years old and he's going to have the ball in his hands spraying turnovers. So I'm lower on Danny Wolf for that reason. I don't think he's an amazing shooter either. I think he shoots 60% from the free throw line. And I think he's a better shooter than that, but I'm just pointing out that shooting, one of the best shooting indicators is free throw line. And he's not particularly great there. And he sprays turnovers. So I just don't think you're going to put a ball in the hands of the guy. So if you're going to draft him, that won't be for the role he's playing right now. And I don't see the upside of playing him in a different role. I mean, a guy who reminds me of him a little bit is Kyle Filipowski. He's actually doing a very good job with the Jazz. He has defensive issues, but that was a given. But what he's done in the NBA is, he's done some ball handling, but what's impressed is he's shooting better than he did at Duke. And that's really impressive. But he's not putting the ball on the floor that much. So is Wolf going to be a lottery pick as a guy who's 2 years older than even Filipowski is right now? I'd be skeptical.
All right, I've had a couple conversations that you would appreciate. One, I talked to a team maybe about a month ago, and they were saying like they need someone like Danny Wolf. They need just a big man in their big rotation that can pass and do something out of dribble handoffs because they don't have that on their roster. So then I had a conversation, and I was at a Mavericks game, and I was talking to a general manager of an opposing team. Saw him walking in the hallway. We spoke for a second, and he says, "Rafael, who do you like in this draft?" And you appreciate this because I said, "Man, I really like Maxime Reynaud. I think he's the most underrated player." And I, start spitting out, the accolades. And so he says, "You like Reynaud over Danny Wolf?" And I said, "I actually do, because I think that Reynaud is easier to plug in play than Wolf." And we got into the conversation, and I basically said what you just said. Like Danny Wolf's best attribute is the size and the playmaking, but he's very turnover prone. And if you're not going to give him the keys as like your point center, and the ball handling is reduced, then you have to decide, like, is the playmaking worth the turnover risk? So then I ended up speaking about Danny Wolf with another scout. And the scout said that he had spent a lot of time watching Wolf's film, and he said, yes, if you look at his turnovers, he said there's going to be a turnover where he throws the ball and someone's not ready because his teammates they're not looking. He said there's going to be a turnover where he just absolutely throws the ball into the fifth row of the crowd. It's just going to be unforced, just an absolute brutal turnover. And then there's just some that he has with just with all his responsibilities. But he's like, if he has two where one is just a bonehead decision and one is because he's such a gifted passer that his teammates aren't used to, like, or they're cutting and they're not looking, he said that's two of his turnovers right there. So anyway, I've had some interesting conversations about Wolf. There's some people that really, really love him because he's so unique. And then there are some that have questions about how it fits in the NBA and what is exactly his role. With Robinhood Gold, you can now enjoy the VIP treatment, receiving a 3% IRA match on retirement contributions, and the privileges of the very privileged are no longer exclusive. With Robinhood Gold, your annual IRA contributions are boosted by 3%. Plus, you also get 4% APY on your cash and non-retirement accounts. That's over 8 times the national savings average. The perks of the high net worth are now available for any net worth. And the new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. To receive your 3% boost on annual IRA contributions, sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate subject to change. The 3% match requires Robinhood Gold at $5 a month for 1 year from first match. You must keep the funds in the IRA for 5 years. Go to robinhood.com/boost.
The NCAA Tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA Tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Let's talk about a big, and you talk about older, Ryan Kalkbrenner. And did he win Big East Defensive Player of the Year for the 4th year in a row?
He sure did. I've said it for 4 years now. I think he's really good. And I interviewed him at the Combine 2 years ago, and I kind of thought he'd leave because that team made the Elite Eight, was just a nudge away from making the Final Four, as they had a foul against San Diego State in the Elite Eight. But Kalkbrenner has improved subtly each year. Like, he enables Creighton to play a brand that is reminiscent of what the Jazz did with Gobert. Everyone goes and takes away the perimeter and funnels into Kalkbrenner. He doesn't foul, and he takes away the paint and makes you shoot floaters and mid-range jump shots. And Creighton's defensive metrics, though you'd say based on the talent, shouldn't be very good, they're always pretty good. Creighton and Kalkbrenner, I think he can do that at the NBA level. He's not going to be the most swift of foot. He's not going to be a switching defender, but he's got great timing, great discipline, influences shots, and he's a good shooter for his size. So I think there is a possibility he steps out and he can play a pick and pop 5. And he's a crafty player on the interior. He's not going to be a guy that you're throwing crazy lobs to. He's not soaring through the air, but he's a true 7-1 who's got good hands, good coordination, and is a defensively elite player. So for the 3rd or 4th straight year, I think Kalkbrenner's draftable.
I think you're like a low-key Creighton guy. You know, I'm from Omaha, but you love Shireman last year. You love Kalkbrenner this year. And I saw a comparison on Twitter, and someone mentioned that they think Kalkbrenner could play a role similar to Luke Cornett in Boston. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if he's that good of a shooter yet, but I think he's got shooting touch. I've seen Kalkbrenner play in person a number of times, just luck of the draw when going to tournament games. And every single time I'm impressed. So I think he's better than a lot of the bigs that are more touted because he plays at a school like Creighton that doesn't necessarily generate the numbers that some of these big schools do. He's a guy that I think you can plug and play, much like Cornett on the Celtics, as a backup big, and you won't notice a difference on the court because he'll still instill your schemes and he'll knock down the shots he's supposed to. It'll be inconspicuous but effective.
So they have a matchup against Louisville, and he goes up against James Scott. James Scott is like one of my guys. You know, like we all have our guy. I think James Scott is a future NBA player just because of his athleticism, the rim protection, and he's a sneaky good passer. He's still young. Like, he was like a 17-year-old freshman last year. He may still be 18 years old as a sophomore. Scott made the jump from College of Charleston to the ACC. I think he played a significant role in Louisville's success, but he has his work cut out for him against Kalkbrenner. Is this a game that you think Kalkbrenner can dominate just because of his size and physicality?
I think I'm going to take Creighton just because of Kalkbrenner. Like, I think every other position on the court, I think Louisville has the advantage, but the game will be dictated on how to score the ball against Kalkbrenner. And Kalkbrenner is going to take up the middle, and a lot of those guys that for Louisville that I think are good, Edwards, Chucky Hepburn, a lot of those generate shots by getting downhill, and those will get taken away by playing Kalkbrenner. So I'm going to take Kalkbrenner just because he's an anchor that's so unique in college basketball right now. I think Louisville's a better team than Creighton, but Kalkbrenner is just a unique matchup.
What's interesting about that matchup, or a storyline about that matchup, is Chucky Hepburn is from Omaha. He's born and raised in Omaha, so he's playing against his hometown Creighton Blue Jays. All right, let's talk about the guy that is, in my opinion, the best shooter in the 2025 NBA draft. If you're an Auburn fan, then you can skip this section of the podcast because you probably still have nightmares about what John Poulakidas did last year. And he has an opportunity this year to do it again, as Yale is a 13 seed, and they're playing against a 4th seeded SEC team. Last year was Auburn, and this year is Texas A&M. Do you think Poulakidas, hopefully I'm saying it right, do you think that if he has another strong performance and maybe even pulls out an upset, side note, if Yale beats Texas A&M, that would be the 3rd consecutive year that an Ivy League team won in the first round. But do you think he can earn himself a spot in the second round with another strong performance?
I think it's possible. He can really shoot the ball. He's got great range. Yale's a well-schooled team, and I know that sounds like playing the stereotype, but they really rebound well, which is what you have to do against Texas A&M. Yale is top 25 on the defensive glass, and Texas A&M is in the top tier of offensive rebounding. So there is a chance for upset, and I think even if he doesn't play particularly well, the fact that he'll have more exposure is a huge win. That said, he has to play well to elevate Yale's offense to score against the Texas A&M athletes and defensive team. So I think he has a chance. I really do think he's one of the best shooters in the draft. I'd have to really rank out my hierarchy of shooting ability, but he has the volume and the percentage at an elite level. Now, the question would be, can he do it against athletes as frequently as some of these other guys have to do it against athletes? But he's a really talented player, shoots the heck out of the ball. I'll be curious to see how this game's officiated because there's a lot of free throws taken last year between Yale and Auburn, and Texas A&M is a physical team. So if there's a lot of free throws, he may make a name for himself with another 30-piece.
All right, let's talk about the Ole Miss North Carolina matchup. North Carolina got in because they absolutely slaughtered San Diego State yesterday. That was actually a disappointing game. I took a nap during it because it was like 37 to like 12 or something like that. I don't remember exactly.
It was a terrible game.
It was a terrible game. And San Diego State had like 7 easy turnovers that were just given to them by North Carolina at the start of the game, and they couldn't capitalize. So it leaves North Carolina in a matchup against Ole Miss. I want to talk about Ian Jackson and Drake Powell, 2 guys that entered the season as first-round picks on my board. I mean, I can't say that they've lived up to the expectations. Ian Jackson had a stretch where he did, where I thought like, hey, Ian Jackson is going to go in the teens. And I don't know what happened after that. I mean, he's totally fallen off a cliff. But what are your thoughts on Drake Powell and Ian Jackson as NBA prospects and how the NCAA tournament could impact their draft stock?
Yeah, I think they both have a chance to raise their stock, but like you said, inconsistency through 30 games doesn't bode well. Drake Powell, to me, has been the more alluring prospect because he's got athleticism, defensive traits you can't teach. And if he's able to defend very well against Matthew Morrell or some of these guards for Ole Miss, and perhaps they make a run, they play Iowa State and make a run, I think that's possible. I think Ole Miss, Carolina, that you could see a decent run come out of the winner of this game. But Drake Powell's got traits you can't teach. Defensively, he gets in passing lanes. He knocks down a few open shots. And I think his stock raises because there's not that many people with that combination of fluidity and size. So I would say he's got a chance of being a first-round pick. I wouldn't, be super confident about it, but I think this means more to him than it does Ian Jackson, unless Ian Jackson has a Johnny Juzang-esque first 4 to final 4, I'm the scorer type of run.
But he's capable of it. Like he had a stretch of games where, I mean, he was phenomenal, and he hasn't scored double figures since March 4th, and that was against Virginia Tech. What happened, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, they play a style with a bunch of guards, and all of them are ball in hand for different reasons. Cadeau can't shoot, so he needs the ball in his hands. RJ Davis, last year's a first-team All-American, so he wants the ball in his hands. Seth Trimble, not a great shooter, very good driver, wants the ball in his hands. And I think it's just too much my turn, your turn, and you kind of phase out the guy who's younger and doesn't pass. Like Ian Jackson doesn't pass. So I think the fact that the other guys, even when they have the ball, make a few passes is better than when Ian Jackson isolates and doesn't pass.
0.9 assists per game for Ian Jackson. That's not good when you're 6'4". But he had a stretch of games. He had UCLA 24 points, 26 points against Campbell, 23 against Louisville, 27 against Notre Dame, 18 against SMU. Then he had back-to-back 20-point performances against NC State and Cal. Is that a sign of how bad the ACC was, or is that a sign of what he's capable of? I don't know.
I think the ACC was terrible, but I do think he's really talented. Like he kept him in some games too that they lost, and so it looks like kind of irrelevant because they lost the game. But Ian Jackson was the reason they were in the game against some of the better teams that they played. The game that they won against UCLA, who I don't think is all that great, but they are 7 seed. They are defensively, well respected. I think he was excellent in that game, but I don't know. I've never been a fan of guys who don't pass, and he does not pass. And he's not big enough to have the oh, like, yeah, he can be Ace Bailey. He's not that to me. And even Trey Johnson, like the very first game, Trey Johnson scored 28 against Ohio State. I criticized the lack of passing he did despite obvious scoring ability. And now Trey Johnson, I think I would be comfortable putting the ball in his hands as the pseudo point guard of an NBA team because I know he can make passes. Ian Jackson has given me zero faith to believe he can pass. I wouldn't take in the first round despite talent. He's obviously talented. I just don't like that he never passed the ball. You can make an argument maybe he's like Tyrese Maxey, but Tyrese Maxey is a winner. Like he played on a Kentucky team that I think had a chance to win a national championship if COVID didn't get canceled. Or the COVID tournament didn't cancel the tournament. But I don't know. Ian Jackson's a tough sell for me, and I felt this way all year. And we've talked about it on and off air. I've talked about this in years past. I don't love that archetype of player.
Well, that wraps up this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board Podcast. We have one more region to cover, and that is the Midwest region. And the reason we have not done it yet is because there is a big matchup between Texas and Xavier tonight that will play a role in the seeding. So stay tuned for that episode. Once again, thank you for making this your first listen of the day, maybe your third listen because this is the third podcast of the day. But we are out of here.